So, in this third and final podcast on primary sources for Second Temple Judaism, I'll introduce you to two important authors and then conclude with just some comments about the nature, the general nature of primary sources during this period. So, introduce you to Philo. Philo is an important source. This is somebody who's basically a contemporary with the Apostle Paul. So he's in the first century. He lives in Alexandria in northern Egypt. And he's a Jew, and he's influenced by the philosophies of Plato, Pythagoreanism, and Stoicism. And so here is an example of a Jew who has received a great deal of Hellenistic education, Greek education, and is attempting to present Jewish faith and the Jewish scriptures to non-Jews, um, and and repackaging, as it were, the biblical materials and the faith so that it can sound appealing or intelligible to those who are non-Jews who would look at Jewish faith as being kind of barbaric, archaic, something that is not philosophically astute or sophisticated. So Philo will attempt to introduce non-Jews to what he sees as a better perspective of what Judaism is really about. So he's a prolific writer. He did expositions of laws. He did kind of exegetical commentaries, if we can really call them exegetical commentaries. They're really commentaries going kind of, through different verses. He's not really getting into, understanding an author's original intent or author's original audience, what we would oftentimes associate with contemporary exegetical practices. But he is attempting to comment on Jewish literature, particularly the Pentateuch, in ways that show basically an allegorical understanding of the things that are there. So he is, introducing readers to applied hermeneutics, dialogue. So that's a very Hellenistic thing. Think of Socratic questioning. And one way of coming to arrive at truth is you ask a question, a response is given, an answer is given. You ask questions about that answer, more answers is given. You ask more questions about that answer, and you keep moving. So what we see in some of Philo's writings is that's what he will do. He will take a question. He'll pose a question that he imagines some inquisitor might ask, and then he'll give an answer. And then he'll have a question. He'll have an answer. So he is this dialogue that takes place. So he also used allegorical interpretations to link Jewish traditions with Hellenistic philosophies. So allegory is really a huge thing in the ancient world, where the understanding of something being true can be discerned from the surface. So a true thing is not necessarily what is the seen thing or the thing that is on the surface, but what it stands for. So you allegorize things, that here is something that one sees in the physical world, but this thing that one sees stands for some other truth. So for instance, if you see Jews doing certain things, like not working on the Sabbath, or you see them engaging with circumcision, or you see them engage with animal sacrifice, these things stand for some other truth. And so what Philo wants to do is he wants to show that while Jews are doing these things, and they may look barbaric to the non-Jew, actually they are things that point to realities or truths or virtues that the non-Jew should be able to appreciate, or at least the philosophically trained non-Jew should appreciate. So Philo came from a very wealthy family, a very influential family. One of his brothers was a high government official. Philo himself was involved at one time going to Rome as a representative of the Jewish community in Alexandria when they were feeling like there were some new laws that were disadvantaging them. They went to protest, went to Rome. He was part of that delegation. And so to try and appreciate a highly educated, Hellenized Jew and how he thinks of his faith and how one is an observant Jew, the right kind of Jew, interpreting the law in light of the Hellenistic world in which they live in. Philo is a key person to dialogue. For instance, one of the things that we get from Philo that's kind of helpful for us when we read the New Testament is the idea of the logos. The logos, so this Greek word logos interprets, we translate it with the word word. So when you read John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word. Well, a logos is a concept that exists within Stoic thought. Philo will use the concept of logos as this kind of divine force that exists within the world. So when you're looking at how the author of John wants to introduce Jesus as this divine logos, you may want to reflect then on how Philo thinks about the logos and make kind of comparisons and contrasts between what's happening. So Philo of Alexandria, who is a first century CE Hellenistic Jew. Another very important source is the author Josephus. Josephus has a wonderful background story. He was one of those who were involved in the resistance towards Rome, was involved in kind of guerrilla warfare against the Romans, particularly up in Galilee. He was apprehended, and then he was kind of forced to be a translator for the Romans in their dialogues with Jews, especially as they were laying siege to Jerusalem. Josephus kind of saved his neck by proclaiming that he had received a vision that Vespasian would be, the Messiah, that Vespasian was God's anointed, and that he would become ruler, which he did end up becoming the ruler. While he was general, there was turmoil back in Rome, and after a couple of years of different people trying to become emperor, Vespasian winds up becoming emperor. Josephus's prophecy of Vespasian is remembered. He is kind of then given a new task or role to be kind of like a biographer of Judaism. He writes these antiquities, this history of Jews. So he's a very important writer. His writing really takes place after the Second Temple period, but he's an important source for understanding how at least one Jew sees the history of the Jews, gives an explanation for the history of the Jews. But again, we have to read Josephus, as we do with all sources, with a careful eye. Josephus tends to exaggerate numbers, and he may be distorting practices and activities in order to align his agenda with presenting Jews to a Roman audience in a more favorable light. So His background is he's something of a priest. He spent some time interacting with the Essene people, the people oftentimes associated with the Dead Sea Scrolls community out at Qumran. He was a Pharisee, general, as I've said, of the Galilean revolutionists. He becomes a Roman mediator between Jews and Roman. His four major works are Jewish Wars, Antiquities of the Jews. Against Appian is a source where Appian is an anti-Semite, critical of Judaism, and so Josephus is trying to explain Judaism or make a case, a defense for Judaism to this antagonist. And then he also writes his own kind of autobiography. So, a very important source. Is he a reliable historian? He does provide a lot of material that is valuable to those who want to reconstruct history. And so he is very oftentimes cited by scholars as a source that provides historical data. As I also said, he does need to be read carefully, and if there is other sources that can be put into dialogue with what Josephus writes, it needs to be. He shouldn't just be read superficially as if whatever he claims is true, especially when he's accounting sizes of battles. So Josephus, as you can see in terms of the dates, is living there towards the end of the first century. But he is important. Probably some of the things that's most important for a lot of Christians is there is a little discussion in Antiquities where he introduces or talks about Jesus. There's some question about this material, whether or not it's interpolation or it really does come from him. He also gives some information about James, the brother of Jesus, and his death, and that's interesting. So there's a whole bunch of other kind of characters that we find in the New Testament that are also talked about by Josephus. So a really important source for reconstructing Second Temple Judaism. We're getting insights into ideas and values and worldviews of Second Temple Jews. So I want to just end here by talking about the general nature of primary sources, thing to always keep in mind when reading them. First of all, primary sources are generally evolved. That is, none of these sources that I've introduced you to were probably written sitting at one stage, one person just writing something out. Instead, what we have is things that are written and then someone comes back and writes more. They expand on it. We also have works are often interpolated. That is, someone comes along, not the original author, but someone later comes in and puts other materials inside. And so these authors may live at a different time and they live in a different place than where the document originally originated from. So they are evolved, they are interpolated, and they are redacted. So our sources have gone through a history in which other people have edited them. They sometimes leave out things, they rewrite words, they rewrite sections, or they reorganize the documents, putting things in different kinds of orders. So this is the nature of a lot of primary sources in antiquity, and it needs to be reminded that the New Testament are books of primary sources at the same time, and they too have an evolution to them. They too have had periods of being redacted. There is also evidence of interpolation that happens with different New Testament books. And so that's just the nature of the things that we're dealing with. So whenever you see something in an ancient source, like one of these sources, you do have to wonder, okay, what I'm reading here, is it part of what was originally in the earliest stages of this document? Has it been interpolated by somebody else? Has it been edited by someone else? Is something missing? And so these are cautionary observations just about the nature of our primary sources.